So, class, today we're going to talk about planning business messages. There are 5 steps in the communications process, and sometimes we have to plan. Remember in the video that you watched with Jackie, she told us that the message is not complete until it has been decoded. We encode a message, transmit it, and it's decoded on the other end. If it's not decoded, then it's not effectively transmitted. And how do you know if it's been decoded properly? You have to ask. That's called check for understanding. And that's actually a term that you'll hear, check for understanding. So you say, now, does that make sense? And a lot of times you'll be at a company where they get in the habit of asking that in every time they're speaking in a sales meeting or in a marketing meeting or whatever kind of weekly meeting you have in your department. They'll say, does that make sense? Because they're checking for understanding. And they really do want you to say if it doesn't so that they can phrase it in another way. So here we have a graphic that describes what I was just talking about. And we're going to look at the Guffey's 3x3 writing process and how that guides your writing.
Guffey's 3x3?
No. That was just something I wanted you to read. So, defining your business writing goals. We begin by knowing why we're going to write. Do we have to write? It needs to be purposeful, economical, and audience-oriented. When I have an issue that is sensitive, but not that I don't want reported, in my real estate business, for instance, I wanted to check to make sure that the listing agent spoke Spanish to talk to her client who was selling the house to my client. I didn't want to put in writing. I had had a bad deal just before that where an agent had a client who spoke Spanish and broken English, and he did not speak Spanish. That deal fell through and wasted a week of my client's time of looking. So rather than just wait and see if that happens again, I wanted to make sure that that wasn't going to happen with this listing agent. And so I thought about it. I woke up at 4 a.m. thinking, how am I going to find out she's new? How do I find out that she is capable of translating this? Do I call her supervisor? Do I send her an email? Do I send her supervisor an email? Well, we don't really have supervisors. We're independent contractors, so that's insulting. I didn't want to insult her. It's a small town. We're going to have to do business again and again and again. So you don't want to insult the other people that you're going to be working with. So this morning, when I sent her the contract, I just said, please call me when you get the contract. And she texted me when she got the contract because the younger you are, the more you don't want to call. You want to just text, communicate. And I would obviously prefer to text on anything that's just business, but in this case, I really needed to clarify, and I didn't want to put it in writing and insult her, because when you put something in writing, it is more likely to be perceived, and this is an important point, as a level more negative than you intended it. So if I say something that's positive, it's going to be perceived, interpreted as just neutral. If I say something that's neutral, it's going to be perceived as negative. And so because we don't have the body language, we don't have the other things that help encode the message for the receiver. So I wanted to call her and at least have the voice and have it at least more positive in that way. So it turns out she does speak Spanish. The document that was incorrectly posted before had been posted by another agent, and she was going to handle this appropriately. And I said, instead of saying, are you going to use the net to seller sheet that you need to use in order to make sure that your client knows exactly how much money they're getting? Instead of saying that to her, I said, do you have the net to seller sheet in Spanish? And she said, no, but I will explain it to him. And I said, awesome. She knows what she's doing. I don't need to check on this anymore. And she got back to me within the same day with a counter. So we're constantly going back and forth and checking for understanding. And when it has to do with something like real estate or medicine or law, you're dealing with someone's life, or financial advising, you're dealing with someone's life. You have to be clear. You have to take the time to make sure that everything is understood completely before people are signing contracts. So that's what I mean by purposeful. Economical, that means you use as few words as possible to still get the message across. Audience-oriented, that means that you're speaking to to know who your audience is. I wanted to know that she was speaking in Spanish to her Spanish audience. In the movie, the dark-haired executive was talking about how she had a message to send, and it was going to be to the wrong people, that they wouldn't get it. No, it was the secretary. In the movie, the secretary said to the HR guy, but people won't understand this because they don't understand what you're talking about. And he said, no, they'll understand it. She said, no, they won't. So they kept talking back and forth until they came to agreement. So in the 3x3 writing process, we have pre-writing, drafting, and revising. So pre-writing comes before you actually write the document. You're thinking, you're analyzing the audience and the purpose. You're going to anticipate the audience's reaction. You're going to adapt the message to the audience. And you're going to pick your channel of communication. In the drafting, we're researching, and that's why it's in the drafting phase, because we're writing our first draft of what we're going to say. Then we're going to organize the info. In this communications age with keyboards and everything, what we tend to do is we tend to just throw everything out on the page and then start organizing it, and then we need to make sure it's in logical order. So sometimes I'll be moving something that I thought of first down toward the end, and I'll be moving things around on the page by cutting and pasting. Then we look at it, we've got our first version, and then we revise it. We want to edit for clarity. Again, moving things around, changing words, double click on a word, right click to see the thesaurus and see if there's a better word for what you're trying to say, if it seems like it might be unclear. Proofread means for errors of spelling, punctuation, capitalization, numerical errors, grammar, and paragraphing. And then evaluate whether the message will accomplish its goals. The revising is actually 50% of the process. Pre-writing, they say, is 25%. I would say it's a little less than that. But because when you're actually sitting down, we just don't have time to pre-write nowadays. We've got to sit down, put it on the paper. If we think about it, then we've got to have plenty of time to think about it. So we've got to get it on paper, and that's the drafting. And then we spend the time revising it to make sure it's clear. Because in drafting, we are encoding the message. And in revising, we're trying to anticipate how the receiver will decode the message. So first we're thinking of that three-part chart. We're looking in more detail at the first section where we analyze the purpose, anticipate the audience, and select the best communication channel. If you are not going into sales, anything I say in this course that has to do with sales, you still need to learn, because you need to learn how to sell yourself to get that job. Sell yourself in that interview. So when we're anticipating and profiling the audience, these are some questions we can ask ourselves. You can pause the video or you can stop and read it. And then we have to consider our secondary audience and how they're different from the primary audience. Do we need to supply more background information for them or reshape the message for secondary audience? So what's in it for me is what receivers will be thinking. Why do I need to read this? Should I even read it? When I get my 100 emails in an hour and a half on Tuesdays, I'm just skimming one subject line, just the subject line. What's in it for me? If I'm skimming the subject line and you want me to stay on your email, your subject line better be important. And it can't just say urgent or important. It has to tell me what it is you want. I'll often put quite a few words in the subject line if that's what it needs to describe it enough for people to stay there and read my email. So here are the factors affecting what channel you choose to use, whether it's the telephone, the computer, whether it's a text, a video, an audio message. primary personal message in Facebook, a Facebook post. All of these are different ways of communicating. How important is the message? How fast do you need feedback? Do you need a permanent record? How expensive is it to transmit it in this way, like a FedEx overnight? Degree of formality, confidentiality and sensitivity, the receiver's preference, and the receiver's technical expertise. These are two that we have to deal with a great deal, those of us who are technologically savvy. Because we have to, if they can't open it, or download it, or read it, then it's useless. Communication didn't occur. Need for a permanent record. You can make a permanent record about just about anything nowadays. Even if it's a Snapchat, you take another phone and take a picture of the phone. You can make a permanent record of anything nowadays. So do be aware that some of the things that it talks about in this course, you know, there's a permanent legal record, but there's the permanent record, and anything can be permanent. In Texas, even your phone conversation can be permanent because this is a state where only one person has to know if the phone call is being recorded. In some states, both have to know. So the 10 levels of richness in workplace communication channels. We start with the richest is face-to-face. It's best for persuasion, bad news, and personal messages. If I have to tell you something that's very important, critical to the success of our project, I should tell you face-to-face, or at least follow up face-to-face. Telephone is the second best choice. Sorry, old school still works because we still have the visual in face-to-face, and in telephone we still have the audio. Why would video chat be third? It would be third because it's good for group and consensus building when members are dispersed and you're trying to get all their opinions. But among two people, it's for a lot of people, one of the people is not technologically savvy enough to carry it off. I expect that it will become probably second on the list before telephone, before long. But the problem is just that you have a technologically superior person who can video chat just like that, and you have the other person who's struggling, and that causes tension before the conversation even happens for that person who's worried about failing to look good, to pull it off technologically. Then we have email. Good for routine messages that do not require immediate feedback. A lot of people expect immediate feedback on an email. If you need immediate feedback to an email, then you probably should text. Or you should, I even get in real estate, we even have someone will send an email and then text and say, I sent you an email. Did you get it? To confirm that. I don't think many people are using the read receipt feature that's available in Outlook, but a lot of email programs you can, and there's an extension in Chrome, a lot of times you can send the email and request a read receipt, a receipt that it had been read, not the color read. The person on the other end, though, has to allow that receipt to be sent, and a lot of people find that to be offensive. So again, these are things that will change as technology is embraced by more and more people and younger people. An instant message is good for short online messages that need a quick response. A letter, nobody uses that anymore. But when you offend someone, a note card is a good way to reach out to them. For special occasions, a note card is a good way. To submit when you're feeling, sensitivity for someone because of a death in the family or an illness, perhaps, then a letter or a note card is a good way to go. A blank note card that you write on yourself is more powerful than a note card that costs $6 and has a flowery message and all you do is scribble your name. So it's actually cheaper to go to half-price books, buy some blank note cards, and use those for times when you need a note card. A memo, I don't think those happen anymore. A blog, that's part of marketing, and you can have an internal blog within a company, but even then it's like the HR department is doing its monthly newsletter. It's not something that you're expecting responses to. Although blogging is also what happens when there's, like in the Eagle, a story that people find controversial in our local newspaper, the Eagle. People will respond to it, and that becomes a sort of blog because people are talking amongst themselves in public. A report is generally scientific or for an engineering report, something that has a spec sheet, something that delivers data, and it needs to be recorded so people can review it because it's very dense. And a wiki is, we know what Wikipedia is. Wikipedia is actually a shared input. You can actually write information, in Wikipedia. You submit it, and it's part of it. There are other wikis that are not as formal as Wikipedia that aren't reviewed, and then you can have all kinds of nonsense in there, like a Yahoo question and answer board. They'll have silly questions and sillier answers. But that's a sort of wiki. So we're going to look at employing adaptive writing techniques, such as incorporating audience benefits, developing the U-view, and using conversational but professional language. In this example, we see a way to do it and the way to not do it. So in orange is not, in yellow is yes. In yellow, we see it's not even that much of the U-view. You could even say, you will love the account dashboard that we have created. This is not really as much U-view as it should be. In this one, it talks about being conversational but professional. The top one is just among friends. The bottom one is too official. The bottom one is too official. And the language is too unfriendly. So in this, it starts with we, and then in this, it doesn't have the we in it. In this, it has we at the beginning, near the beginning. In this one, we avoid saying we. It's a little thing, but it takes the focus off the sender and puts it on the receiver and shows them why they should do it. Nowadays, with so many emails coming in and so much communication going on in this digital age, you've got to not only grab people's attention, but you've got to keep it by saying what's in it for them. In the first one, we have the we view that we don't want to use, and in the second one, we have the you view that tells you what's in it for you. The first one, we start with I. The second one, we tell them that we want to hear their thoughts, that they are important. So the first one, it's very blunt and to the point. Yes, we are supposed to be concise and use as few words as possible. However, we have to try to make it seem personal and human in writing. So one thing that we do around here that I learned from Ms. Schultze is she opens her emails with, hi there. And when she first started doing it, it was like, I don't have time for this. I just jump into the email. And I started realizing that it was necessary to put that little hi there in there to just kind of break the ice and say, you're human, I'm human, let's talk. So when that's appropriate, do that. In the second one, we have the issue of bias in the language. We don't refer to women as girls. In the first one, we're using a big fancy word like remuneration. Most people can't even say it, let alone read it. In the second one, the first one, it says use plain language. That's what remuneration is, salary. And in the second one, instead of please contact me, we need to tell them exactly how to contact. Please email me. Please text me. Please call me. If you think they won't call you and you need to call, say, please text me when you get this and I will call you. So these are some examples of negative expressions and their hidden messages. Please read them. Pretty powerful, huh? But yes, that's how people can interpret these things. This is an example of a bad slide. because we have white font on a light background. We'll talk more about that in chapter 12. We also have a lot of information on there. A little too much, probably. And that's all there is.